meetings simultaneously. So tonight we are not live streaming because they have meetings previously scheduled. We will do that whenever we can. All videos will be posted on the Metro YouTube channel within 24 hours. So that'll be a resource for everyone. I just want people to be mindful of that. You are welcome to attend any meeting as an attendee. We have several attendees on this call from other committees. I see Mr. Harris, Mr. Turnley, Mr. Foster, Channel 5 News attendee, and there's a call-in user. I'm not sure, Kevin, if you can unmute, but call-in user for...
That's Bob. He's already unmuted.
So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. With that, I want to turn it over to Mayor Dean.
Okay, am I coming over? Well, let me welcome everybody also to the meeting, and obviously with the events of this past week, I think underscores the importance of the work we're doing, and I certainly appreciate each of you being willing to do this. I think the first thing that we have on the agenda to address is to select a chair and a vice chair. We had originally talked about someone being a reporter, but we thought after hearing from folks that maybe the better way to approach it was to have a chair and vice chair where they could work together, help move the process along, keep others informed as to how things are going, and to make sure the process is fair and all voices get heard. I mean, obviously, the vice chair would also be in a position where if the chair for some reason can't make a meeting, and there will be plenty of meetings, so that could happen, that the chair would obviously the vice chair would act as chair. John, is there anything else you wanted to say about the vice chair position? I didn't.
No, I think we'd also ask that the vice chair be willing to sort of take the lead in drafting recommendations for each committee, of course, working with the chair, but hope that'll be part of the function. So
the way we thought we'd approach this is that if anyone, I think there are people who may be interested, who are interested in serving in one of those two positions, open it up for someone to just state that they're willing and wanting to do that. And I guess we would start with chair first, and then if there are more than one candidate, I don't know what we will have, just have a vote. So I would ask that anybody who is on this committee, the police policy committee here, to if they're interested in serving in the chair position, to indicate that.
Carl, you want us to do that verbally or with the hands or whatever?
I think verbally. I don't know how it's coming across to you all, but if it was, I think we might miss somebody if they don't do it verbally.
Okay. All right. This is Russ Pulley. I would simply offer my services. It's not that I'm really fighting to have this position, but I'm comfortable in it. And there are plenty of mighty fine and capable people on the committee, but I understand schedules are really crazy. So I'd certainly offer to serve in that position if it be the will of committee that's the case.
Thank you. Any other folks interested in the chair position?
Evening, everyone. This is Ashley Davis. I certainly extend myself as well, as I shared in the earlier conversation. I'm happy to make myself available. But similar to our colleague here, Mr. Pulley, I could be the will of the committee.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to be considered?
Yes, I would like to be considered as well, and I would love to share why. In the event that Ashley were to be able to serve in that position, I would respectfully ask to possibly serve as her vice chair. I think she would make an excellent chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. One more chance, and I guess we'll close consideration.
Before we vote, if we could just hear a little bit about, those who are planning to run.
Okay, I think that's fair. Russ, why don't we start with you since you went first? Give us just a few minutes on your background and your interest in this subject.
Sure. Thanks very much, Carl. With respect to the position of chair, I would say the way I view that role is someone who can efficiently and effectively run a meeting, and someone who can fairly and impartially facilitate a discussion amongst everyone who is in the committee. And, I've done that before and I'm comfortable in that role. For those of you, I don't know that my background is important to this discussion, but my background is in public service and a lot in law enforcement. I currently serve on the council, and I'm currently, for about another 2 days, the chair of the Public Safety Committee. And I've served in that role in a number of different other organizations, chairing boards and so forth. So the only reason I would say is I have an interest in just making sure that the meetings are run fairly, impartially, efficiently, and effectively. Thank you.
Ashley?
Evening, everyone. First of all, let me thank Mr. Jackson for that suggestion. I appreciate the opportunity to share a bit. The purpose of, or my interest in being the opportunity to serve in this role is not quite different from what Mr. Pulley just shared. I absolutely believe, without a doubt, the chair of any committee needs to have the ability to run meetings smoothly, to allow the group to deliberate when there's a necessary focused discussion, but to also invite dissenting opinions so that we can reach the best outcome. And with that, I've certainly been doing that for Nashville specifically for the past 2 years, without a doubt, but also in my own professional and civic engaged life for the past 12 and a half years. This is a topic that's important, not just to me professionally, but personally. And as many of us are connected to the Nashville community, I think without a doubt, we all come to the table with different opinions, but we need a chair that is willing to listen, even if that opinion does not match their own. And that's my perspective. That's my leadership philosophy. That's something I've shown time and time again. So it'd be an honor to serve.
Thank you. Amanda?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was having some technology issues earlier. I have a background in law enforcement. I don't know who has seen my bio or not. I was a parole officer in Atlanta in the beginning of my career. I was a fully sworn law enforcement officer. I've executed arrests, certainly not with the frequency as someone like Mr. Pulley. But I feel like I do have the background of actually being a trained law enforcement officer. I was actually I was nominated for Officer of the Year, and I was asked to be our arrest team coordinator, and I declined that role actually due to some concerns about how our agency executed arrests at the time. I have helped write programs with regard to people who've been arrested and within the criminal justice system. I have been a past co-chair of the Nashville Psychotherapy Institute. I'm currently an LCSW psychotherapist. That's our Nashville area professional association of psychotherapists. I shepherded that organization during a time of great change. I was involved with the State Board of Pardons and Paroles in Georgia when they were going through a period of great change from a more punitive to a more rehabilitative approach. I think Mr. Pulley was absolutely right about staying on task, being efficient and effective, sort of herding cats, as I think all of us who've been in committees know that can be, I have a specialty in trauma, so I'm very trauma informed. I know Rachel professionally through just working with the Sexual Assault Center. But I think achieving consensus, like Ashley said, we may have divergent opinions, but everybody's here because we care very greatly about this city and we want what's best for it. And we want to be able to affect some meaningful and lasting change. And as a psychotherapist who's done family therapy and group therapy, that I just feel like those are things that I have good experience in.
Thank you. Anything further?
Carl, it's Warwick Robinson. I have a question. I understand Mr. Pulley's role and where he's been and the committee he's headed up as part of the Metro Council. And for Ms. Davis, I understand, you know, she's the head of I believe, of the Community Oversight Board. And I understand that direction also, but I wasn't as familiar with Ms. Lucas being part of what is the NOAA committee? I know you provided that. I just didn't know what NOAA does and how they work, please.
Oh, absolutely. NOAA stands for National Organized for Action and Help, and have different areas of focus. Right now, I believe affordable housing is one, education is another, and I work with the task force on criminal justice reform. And so we have done some work around, we helped support the establishment of the COB. We were involved with that for a while, but we're just looking at and doing research around what is working in terms of good, solid policy, data-driven ideas for how to improve our policing practices. So I've actually worked with them, volunteered for about 3 years now, and did a lot of research into other cities' civilian review panels and community oversight boards to see what worked, what didn't work for cities that were, you know, similar to Nashville.
Any other questions or anything? Hey, John?
Yes, sir.
Is
Yes,
the best
sir.
way to do this by a roll call?
I think so, yes.
All right, and this would be, first, this is the chair position. Do you have the list there? Can you run through it?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll proceed in alphabetical order. Bob Allen.
Russ Pulley.
Mira Bilal. Maybe muted.
Miss Davis.
Well,
although I want to say I think all three would be fabulous. I hate to have to pick one.
Nope, no problem. Miss Davis.
All right. Well, I'd like to vote for myself there.
Yeah, expected, just being formal. Mr. Delgado.
Ms. Davis.
Ms. Freeman.
I agree with Mira. I wish I could vote for all three. Ms. Davis has to vote.
Dr. Jackson. You may be muted.
Ashley Davis.
Mr. Johnson.
Russ Pulley.
Ms. Lucas.
You're
I
muted.
believe you're mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ashley Davis.
Mr. Matthews.
Miss
Mr. Oliver.
I will start by saying I think all three made a good case and will serve this board as chair, but Ms. Davis.
Councilmember Pulley.
Actually, I was going to recommend you vote for me and I'll vote for you, but being as you beat me to the punch and you're slaughtering me, I'm going to vote for myself to have a respectable number here.
Mr. That's a very nice sentiment. Mr. Sherrill.
Yes, Miss Davis.
Mr. Robinson.
Miss Davis.
And Mr. Woods.
And I'd like to suggest.
If you're muted, please maybe muted, Mr. Woods. Oh, you're still muted.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to suggest that the vice chair be either Russ Pulley or Amanda Lucas, one of the other two. They're all very impressive.
Okay. We have a committee chair, Ms. Davis. Congratulations. Looking forward to working with you on this. Let's move to the vice chair election. I think we should proceed in the same fashion. Are there any candidates for vice chair?
Can I nominate somebody besides myself?
You certainly can.
I'd like to nominate Larry Woods. I think he'd be excellent in this role.
Mr. Woods, will you accept that nomination?
He's just a troublemaker. Yes, I will accept it. I think one of the other two would be better, but if I have to, I'll accept it.
Are there any other nominees for vice chair? Self-nominees welcome or non?
John, I have a quick question. Is the vice chair still going to have the role of being the scribe and doing some drafting?
So we are taking notes on all these reports, and we'll have a summary of important recommendations after every meeting. We'll provide that as well as a link to the video. We'll share that with the chair and the vice chair pursuant to their desires. As chair, you will shortly take over this meeting, Ms. Davis. That would be our suggestion to you all. So you won't have any minutes taking responsibilities, but we would ask that the vice chair, in addition to being able to fill in when the chair is not available, would take the lead in drafting committee recommendations. I hope that answers your question. Is there anyone else interested in the vice chair position? We have Mr. Woods at the moment. Ms. Lucas?
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no additional candidates, I would propose that we proceed through the roll call again. Mr. Allen.
Amanda.
Ms. Bilal.
Amanda.
Ms. Davis.
Mr.
Delgado.
Ms. Lucas.
Ms. Freeman.
Amanda.
Dr. Jackson.
Larry Woods.
Mr. Johnson.
Well, under the circumstances, I guess Ms. Lucas.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? A little bit of a fuzzy connection. I don't want to misrecord your vote.
No, I just said under the circumstances, I guess Ms. Lucas.
Okay. Ms. Lucas.
Sorry, I thought you were nominating me, John. I would like to vote for myself. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Matthews.
Ms. Lou.
Mr. Oliver.
Mr. Woods.
Mr. Pulley,
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. Larry Woods.
Mr. Sherrill,
Mrs. Lucas.
Mr. Robinson,
Ms. Lucas.
Mr. Woods.
Miss Lucas.
All right, congratulations, Ms. Lucas. You are the vice chair of the committee. I look forward to working with you on this.
Thank you all so much.
So we have, I believe, met agenda item number 2. We are moving to item number 3. I believe, Ms. Davis, as the committee chair, it would be appropriate to hand the proceedings over to you. This is a bit of a funny agenda in that Mayor Dean and our team prepared it. If it is amenable, Davis, I would like to suggest that perhaps I can sort of walk you through the process and give you a little insight into what we are proposing.
Please do.
And of course, in the future, you will prepare agendas, and we will prepare draft agendas for you as you see fit. What we had suggested doing was I wanted to invite my colleague, De-Escalation, to talk a little bit about some of the themes that we heard in the full commission meeting last week, and then to talk a bit about the process that we are recommending the committees adopt. It's a process laid out in the 2-page memorandum that we shared with you. And Ms. Davis, if this is agreeable with you, I would suggest that we invite Ms. Cirillo to talk a little bit about themes and process.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sounds great.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. My name is Dia Cirillo, and I thought I'd start off with just a few words about my background. I have over 2 decades worth of experience in public policy, strategic planning, and systems change. I am a Chicago native. The bulk of my career has been out of my home state of Illinois. In March of 2020, this year, I joined Metro Public Health Department supporting the initiative that works on decriminalization of mental illness. That initiative is called the Community Mental Health Systems Improvement. Prior to joining Metro, I ran my own consulting practice and led some county-wide work on mental health redesign in Rutherford County here. Before coming to Middle Tennessee, I worked in the Illinois Governor's Office and led a national demonstration project on healthcare reform, which engaged, it was an interagency committee. It engaged over 8 agencies, 4 statewide health-related associations, and hundreds of behavioral health providers. I also, prior to that, co-chaired a statewide interagency committee on transportation that was related to transportation equity. So as I introduced to you the process that is recommended here, it comes from that experience, as we're all very focused on ensuring that we can get to specificity of recommendations. I think that will be the hardest challenge of any committee in the commission. First and foremost, one of the things that we heard in the commission launch on August 19th was really several themes that came out from the full commission, including policies around use of force, police department culture, diversity in the workforce, around recruitment, retention, and promotion, strong themes around training, around bias, de-escalation, cultural competency, and trauma-informed approaches, and then certainly transparency, collaboration, and accountability, with a particular focus on the engagement of the Community Oversight Board. Okay, so those were some of the broad themes that were outlined in the memo that was sent to you all by Mayor Dean. Each committee has some identified themes that come out of the mission statement that was sent to you, the mission document that was sent to you. And certainly, some of those themes really look at use of force, engagement of citizens, de-escalation, the relationship with the COB. So the methodology that is recommended for the committee's work is really to look at and to get to programs either that are working here in Nashville or elsewhere, and that ultimately we can have it line up with some good data about how much are we doing, how well are we doing it, and who is better off. And we measure who is better off by skills, attitudes, behaviors, and circumstances. So what you'll see in the timeline of the committee work is a recommendation to use the first 4 weeks as an opportunity to generate ideas and recommendations that correspond to your themes. Your themes are sort of foundational to your work. It helps to bookend what you're doing and give you focus. The themes that we've written in this memo are only recommendations. And really, Madam Chair, it's up to you to take up which themes make sense for your committee. And I believe that's the first assignment on this agenda if you are interested in doing that. On the 5th week, you will have an opportunity to prioritize your recommendations. And throughout the process, we are here to support you to answer any requests for information or data. That's an agenda item tonight, as well as any requests for subject matter experts to come to provide testimony or individuals with lived experience. We've stepped out a timeline and results accordingly, but our work here is really to support you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Miss, would you mind unmuting and just saying your last name for me? I want to make sure I pronounce it appropriately.
Delighted to do so. Cirillo.
Cirillo. Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Thank you very much. It's very helpful. I appreciate the rubric and the information we've been provided. It's actually very helpful to see it lined out week by week. I'd love to hear from the committee. However, if we could just begin and get everyone's input here on just initial thoughts here, if you have any initial thoughts on a recommended first approach, topics that we'd like to focus on first. I'd love to just get, if maybe we already have a general consensus here, and if we could go around the room on that, that would also allow everyone to just briefly restate their name here. I know we heard each other in a larger group, but it'd be great if the committee itself could just be familiar with one another. Could we, in fact, just go in order, in alphabetical order, with starting with Mr. Allen, if that's okay? By the way, does anyone need that document forwarded to them again? Happy to reshare that if anyone's unable to find it. Mr. Robinson? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Allen, would you like to kick us off?
Sure thing. I'd kind of like to say a little bit of my background because on the first meeting, as you might remember, I was muted kind of the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's Bob Allen. I did 35 years here at the Nashville PD, 23 of that being in the training division, actually teaching and supervising use of force instruction, and also did 22 years on the tactical team here and left in 2015. I'm just looking forward to working with the committee and making the MNPD as good as they can be and something that the citizens can trust and have faith in. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Ms. Blau, and please correct me if I mispronounce your name at all.
No, that's perfect. Mira Blau is correct. And I'm so excited to be part of this committee and really humbled to be with such a group of people that have done already amazing things in this arena, in this community. Just a little bit about myself and the things that I think that are pieces of my background that may be applicable and things that you all might need to know about me so that you can encourage me to speak out on certain things that you think may be applicable that I don't think are necessarily. But I'm an attorney, and early in my career, I started out in Washington, D.C. at the Children's Defense Fund. I was part of the Black Community Crusade for Children. And at that time, we were the first organization in the country to do a safety audit of communities. And so one thing that we found in the communities where there was a lot of crime, there was obviously trouble with policing, and really everything just branched out from that. And so we were the first to create an actual safety audit that then went nationally into communities in which they could take and score themselves on how safe or unsafe they were based on the data that we put together. I also have been part of private practice. I was a medical malpractice defense litigator at one point, big firm here in Nashville. I've done lots of brief and legal writing. So if you need any help with any type of scribe, I'm happy to jump in that arena too. I've done more than my fair share of that. I also was a division chief in the criminal district attorney's office in San Antonio, Texas. And while I was doing that, we got a $1.4 million grant to open the first family justice center in Texas, the second one in the country. And so in that format, we had 40 community partners, including law enforcement, the DA, counseling, child protective services, pretty much you name it, under one roof, creating policies together truly from scratch because they didn't exist on how to best serve victims of domestic violence and apprehend perpetrators. And as we know, within the police force, the most dangerous and challenging calls that they have are those domestic violence calls. So we had to really kind of revamp in San Antonio the way that the officers actually approach these cases, how they work with victims of domestic violence, even the questioning methodology that they used. They were using a methodology called Crawford at that time, which is not in favor anymore, but it was a whole process of doing that. We also went into the training academies there in San Antonio and began that process of teaching from the beginning how to go about getting a blank slate and starting with a fresh new culture as they were coming out of the academy to work with these different organizations that were under our roof. And on a side note, it's one thing that I've kind of seen across the country as we've seen a lot of these terrible things unfold in different cities, is that very often an older law enforcement individual that had been in the force for a long time was put with a new person that, and there was a very big discrepancy of power in that as they were trained. And that was something that we had to really deal with and address. And I've noticed as events have occurred across the country, very often it's a very, an individual that's been on the force for a long time with someone that has maybe been on for just a couple of days, and the power discrepancy in decision-making and group decision-making at that time. So that's just a little bit about me, and I'm happy to jump in. I know there's so many topics that we want to address, but of course, across the country, the appropriate use of force is obviously, we have to make sure and I know we're already working on that, but we probably need to really for sure focus on that. And then this whole culture piece. And that's one of the hardest things to do, but we've got to make sure that we have a culture that everyone can approach law enforcement and feel comfortable about it, regardless of their sex, race, socioeconomic, all areas. So those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bilal. And just so I appreciate your comments, and you very much hit on all of the important points, but as we're introducing ourselves, please do continue to share what programs you feel are currently working in Nashville, and similar to what Ms. Bilal just did for us, if there are any jurisdictions, other cities that you feel are best practices that we would want to ask for assistance in learning more about, perhaps inviting them in to address the committee to give us their perspective. All of that is great. And then last but not least, we have been, assigned, and I think most appropriately, the themes of use of force, engagement of citizens, and de-escalation as the three primary themes. Ms. Bilal and others have raised culture. So perhaps we see that as something that we specifically want to look at as well. But I look forward to hearing from everyone on that as well. And Mr. Allen, if we need to, we can come back to you if you have thoughts on that. Let's share. Mr. Delgado.
Hi, my name is Manuel Delgado. I'm a third generation luthier, guitar maker, on Delgado guitars, but I actually went to college and took courses in police science, and my dad brought me up. We used to train the LAPD boxing team, and had I not followed in the family footsteps, I was going through the process for the LA County Sheriff's Department. I probably would be a sheriff's officer today, but I'm not sad at the route that I took. That being said, I've been on the other side, also being pulled over based on the color of my skin, judged for reasons. So that to say, the things that stood out to me in the initial notes that sent out, it talks about scoring Metro Nashville Police Department against the 8 Can't Wait, which they've already adopted, comparing Metro Nashville procedures with other national best practices. And I am excited that we have Mr. Allen and Ms. Lucas and Mr. Woods, folks who have a lot of knowledge regarding the police department, Mr. Oliver. But I feel rather than comparing, we're already a Gold Star CALIA department. I feel like with the practices and the training that's been given to MN or Metro Nashville Police Department, we're doing well in terms of the scoring if we look at ourselves compared to other cities and other states. But I think it's got to go beyond that. If we have to look at things that might, rather than just looking at comparison, things that we might be able to change that can improve the culture, the training tactics, all the different things. I think it's important that all of us should be, I've read through the 26th page of the use of force for our police department and our physical defense tactics. I think it's interesting that, our in custody death syndrome, they get an hour of training for, but, for foot pursuits get 6 hours, things like that we might look at where we might be able to improve. And another thing that I feel is very important is our hiring practices. And in an era right now where people are wanting to defund our police department, I think we need to look at potentially improving the funding so we can improve the hiring pool. I've investigated where, we could hire somebody who, as long as they have a 3-year work history, consistent, they can be a candidate to be a police officer. But that 3-year work history could be flipping burgers. And nothing against that, but now we're suddenly asking them to make judgment calls when they come upon somebody, a person of color, and trying to be sensitive to that culture or the environment. So it's really important to me that we look at our hiring practices and our training ways that we might be able to increase our already higher standards within our police department so that we're sensitive to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delgado. Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. My professional role is the CEO of the Sexual Assault Center, and we work very closely with Metro Police and other law enforcement agencies throughout Middle Tennessee. And one of the things that I'm very hopeful about through the work of this committee is that we can work towards a more collaborative and coordinated community response to disclosures. We know that sexual violence is one of the most underreported crimes, and in a city the size of Nashville, grossly underreported numbers of rape and sexual abuse. And I think that it's extremely important that we look at ways that the training initiatives can be increased for trauma-informed response to disclosures and reports of sexual violence. I also think that while we have an incredible sex crimes unit at MNPD, there is always room for growth and improvement. And sometimes it's just simply more emphasis placed on an area that is such a significant issue in our community. If people are not reporting sexual violence, we're not going to catch the perpetrators, and we're not going to stop the cycle of sexual violence. So we have to figure out a way to address the culture. Mira talked about that a little bit, but so much of it goes back to figuring out ways to create a culture where people feel safe to come forward and report that they won't be victim blamed, that they will be supported and treated in a trauma-informed manner. So I think there's a lot from my professional perspective that can be done to increase and improve our response as a city, as law enforcement to sexual violence. And so that's a personal passion and primary reason for my involvement in the committee, but use of force and the cultural aspects that have already been talked about. And there are a lot of national best practices out there specifically towards improving the reports of sexual violence in relationship with law enforcement as far as this issue is concerned. So I'm happy to be a resource and make connections from my world in that way if needed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Freeman. Mr. Johnson. Oh, or rather, excuse me, I can't skip over Dr. Jackson.
Thanks. My name is Chris Jackson. I'm originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and my early career basically was in college students working with campus ministry for several campuses in Kentucky and University of Tennessee and Lincoln University in Missouri, and then here at Fisk University, Tennessee State University, and American Baptist College. So that's kind of my background. I've been pastoring Pleasant Green for the last 7 years. Before that was at the Temple Church out on Kings Lane. It's a little bit about my background. I'm currently serving also as president of the Interdenominational Ministers Fellowship here at IMF. And of course, we have a lot of different initiatives that we do in response to issues that happen in the city. And I want to hopefully bring a balanced view to this committee. My hope is to bring some sense of, one of the other things that I do is I'm a marriage counselor. And basically I see a lot of conflict happening in marriages. And I think a lot of things that maybe, of course we know that domestic violence is a big thing, and a lot of things I see with people dealing with issues are more relational rather than criminal issues. And it's just like what I see in Sheriff Darren Hall in building that wing, the mental health wing on the new jail. To me, that's just wisdom because there are a lot of things that are not really criminal issues again, but they're mental health issues. And so if we could help train our officers in understanding tools to negotiate conflict resolution, helping them to sort of de-escalate situations where relationships are at a boil. Even what we saw in Kenosha earlier this past week, it was relationally oriented, relational issues. And if that could have just been diffused and de-escalated, I think a lot of lives would have been saved and spared as a result of it. I do want to add that and I mentioned Chattanooga is my hometown, and my cousin, Ulysses Jackson, I don't know if you can see this on the cell phone, but my cousin Ulysses Jackson was the first African-American police officer to be killed in the line of duty in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so I kind of have feelings and understandings in both realms and hopefully bring a balanced view to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, well, I spent 35 plus years as a prosecutor in one role or another. First as an assistant district attorney for a number of years, spent some time in private practice, came back to the office as an assistant, was appointed to be district attorney in late 1987 and served until 2014. So almost 27 years as the district attorney. And then currently didn't run again in 2014. And so currently I'm a law professor at Belmont College of Law, teaching criminal law related courses, trial advocacy related courses as well. So I have more than a 30-year relationship with the police department in the sense of both working with the police department and as well as conducting investigations that into the police department. So in both aspects. Personally, I think the police department, in my experience over the years, has made enormous strides. But as we all know, there's plenty of room for improvement. There's a lot going on, a lot to be seen. That I think this is a good conversation to have as to what our police department should be doing, perhaps things that they should not be doing, and obviously use of force. And I think the relationship with the Community Oversight Board are really probably to me where the priorities lie. Not to the exclusion of others, but again, having enough time to really focus on what's important and not be too spread out. But I think that we've got to, from what I can tell, I know many of the people on this committee, and then there are others that I don't. I'm very impressed with the backgrounds of all the people, and seems to me this is going to be an interesting and worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Lucas.
So I already had an opportunity to kind of fill you all in on my background. I have worked in juvenile court. I have worked in community mental health, inpatient hospitalization. My focus really for these reform efforts, both here as part of this commission, which I'm thrilled to be serving on, and in my work with NOAA, has been about accountability. And this is the conversation that we're having, is that a lot of the issues that we face, you know, as a psychotherapist, happen on a very unconscious level. And as I speak, I also specialize in adolescents. And one of the things that I talk about frequently with people is changing behaviors. Training only goes so far. Training goes into your prefrontal cortex. It's the seat of your executive functioning. The place from which behavior such as misconduct or brutality comes from is a different part of your brain. It's called the limbic system. And the only sort of thing that can burrow into that part of the brain and make an impact on behavior when it is coming from an unconscious level is accountability. And most professions have a certain degree of accountability baked into them. As a healthcare provider, I am audited. Doctors, nurses, other people have licensing requirements that they have to meet. They have licensing boards to whom anyone can make a complaint and an investigation be launched, but we can be audited at any time. And so what I'm really interested in, and why I'm thrilled that people like Mr. Johnson and Captain Oliver and Mr. Pulley and Mr. Allen are here, from that perspective of how the actual day-to-day process works, but also the idea of how do we create a system in which there's accountability, so that when people go to act from an unconscious place, that layer of accountability prevents them from acting in a way that is not in accordance with the values that the city would like them to have, and even at times I think individuals would like to have. And so I'm really curious to see what we can explore in terms of the possibility of using audits or licensing or malpractice insurance or what have you. There's just so many different things that we can explore. I also agree about centering the COB and really strengthening the relationship between the COB and the MNPD. I was very heartened to see Acting Chief Drake. I think something was even published today in the Tennessean saying he was all in on working with the COB. And so that was very heartening to hear that. And then to just kind of echo what Rachel said, was to look at what are we asking our officers to do? Kind of like teachers, we've just assigned them more and more tasks that really fall outside the scope of policing. And is that asking too much? And do we need to have, I did one of my internships with Mobile Crisis through the Mental Health Cooperative, a crisis intervention team that responds to issues of mental health crisis. Other social workers and professionals that could be frontline responders and call the police in when it becomes escalated to a situation. So I just think that we have a terrific opportunity to think outside the box and kind of build on the successes like Tori was talking about, and the things that we do well and the ways in which we excel, and then really sort of reimagine some of the other ways that officers are dispatched to handle complaints.
Thank you, Ms. Lucas. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Again, everyone, my name is Lionel Matthews. I am the current Davidson County Juvenile Court Clerk. I'm a former Metro Council member, served 8 years representing District 1 from 2007 to 2015, and also spent 3 years working in the Mayor's office, directing the Office of Neighborhoods and Community Engagement. And I was also the Criminal Justice Public Safety Advisor under Mayor Megan Barry. And so in that role, I do feel like there were some gains made in the public safety arena, but I do not feel like we went far enough in the time that I served in the administration. And one of my hopes is that Mayor Cooper in this initiative and whatever comes after this, working with the COB and our police department going forward, will be willing to take those necessary steps to make sure that we have one of the best police departments, if not in the state, in the nation. And I hope that both our officers that serve in the department feel that way, but also the community feels that way. And that it's a dual agreement and consensus around what the best police department looks like in this community. I will agree with both Attorney Johnson and Ms. Lucas that I do think that the focus and priority should be on use of force and on the relationship with Community Oversight Board. I think that the latter will help to sustain the work long term after this commission's work is done, to make sure that that the accountability for our department and the opportunity to continue to improve is still there. I will add to the list of things that haven't been mentioned. In addition to accountability, Ms. Lucas, thank you for bringing that up. I definitely think accountability is something that we should really consider how we may be able to innovate a bit, especially looking at how investigations are done around officer-involved shootings. Who all is involved in that, what type of independence is involved in any of those investigations. I also would like for us to think about, in addition to officers' interactions with sexual assault victims and domestic violence victims, think about their interactions with populations with disabilities. And so that is everything from physical disabilities to mental disabilities to autism. I think that is one critical area where there could be some unfortunate circumstances if we don't make sure that they have very tight policies in place. I want to say is that I hope that we can establish a baseline for the work that we're going to do. So one thing that I would like to see is what policy changes and what significant policy changes. I know that there have probably been several, but what significant policy changes has the department made within the last, I would say 5 years, but I would like to see since 2014, if we could, and if the department could get that to us as a baseline, and also training to their training regimen. I know that may be outside, they may consider that outside of policy, but what improvements have been made to the training regimen to give us a baseline and an idea of what they've already done and what we might need to focus on in the time that we're being tasked with coming up with recommendations. I said that was going to be the last thing, but I do want just broadening the idea of public safety to also include law enforcement's interaction and cooperation with the fire department in certain instances. I know that a lot of people in the community have talked about what first response looks like. And in it's not necessary for a police officer to go out and respond to certain types of calls, but what calls do our firefighters respond to? And is there opportunity to include public health in addressing instances or cases where we know that there's a mental health issue involved in a certain situation that may result in. And with that, the floor back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Mr. Oliver.
Yes, Ms. Davis. Thank you. I spent 15 years of my life serving in public safety. Started my career at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. I apologize, you all. I'm at home with children, so. But no, I spent the first part of my career at the University of Tennessee in Nashville, where I started in law enforcement. And being a Black male getting into this profession, you don't necessarily always have the guidance or the people that's going to help you navigate. I knew I wanted to get in law enforcement for a long-term goal to become a federal agent. And that was the career path I chose out of college. Fortunately for me, I met a mentor who's still a mentor today, Black man, who was the chief at the time and helped me get my career started. I was working as a security officer at the time, but getting hired in law enforcement was the first challenge. Fast forward 2011, my wife and I had made the decision to move back and relocate closer to home here in Nashville. She's from Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm from Mount Pleasant, Tennessee. One of the things I wanted to do is transition out of university policing and get into municipal policing. And Metro was the agency I applied for back in the summer of 2010. I came down, took my public service exam and did well on that, physical fitness, aced it, everything. And did not hear anything for a long time. And you get into December, I ended up deciding, okay, we're ready to get back to Nashville, applied with Vanderbilt University Police Department at the time. And in a short time, I got a job, was working. Had been at Vanderbilt going on almost 6 months. Metro finally called me back. I think one of the first things I would want to see, and I remember reading a report in the Tennessean, is the diversity aspect of Metro Police Department. I just remember I could have started my career with or been working at Metro years and years ago, but someone is qualified, educated, and had all the credentials, no criminal history or anything, should have just breezed right through and been selected and started my career. But I ended up going to Vanderbilt, and God makes no mistakes. I'm a captain now, and I've had great experience, and I'm really thankful for all the opportunities I've been given. So as part of being on the committee here, looking at policy, I don't want to forget the process of recruitment and that process and see what we can do to improve that for other individuals who might want a career, and being intentional in our recruitment. There's so many young men and women that could have a promising career to serve their community. Now, speaking of service, a lot of you mentioned a lot of things, and policies is fine. I want to always see where we can be better in our community. So I don't want to come into this with any assumptions. And I want to do my very, very best to leave bias out and really be informed and see what it is that our police department do. I don't know if our police department needs more resources. I don't know if we need less resources. I don't know if the job we're asking our officers to do is well beyond their scope. And maybe it's a commitment the city might need to make. We can't put everything on the police, and we can't assume that they're always the core of the problem, but we can also say that there aren't ways to become better. In Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, good is obviously the enemy to great, but if we believe we're great today, now what took us to get to that point has become obsolete. So we constantly have to reevaluate where we are in that process. So I'm hoping for that. And lastly, the service piece is big to me. I read the final report from President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. I thought in 2015, we knew what we needed to implement those 6 pillars. It's a cultural thing. If we're not committed to doing those things, then we'll be back here again. And so I really want to see us not only talk about what we want to do when we go from here and we get these policies in place and we know what we've improved, we know what we want to go. We need to have some accountability to say, okay, this is what we're doing. we've implemented and go forward to change that culture. And this is our commitment to the community. I don't want to just feel like I'm only safe when I'm in Belle Meade, depending on the zip code. And then I'm on the other area of Nashville, I feel unsafe. And the police is there for me here in my neighborhood. They ride by, I wave at them. But other neighborhoods, I'm running from them. I think people in Nashville should all feel that the police are there to serve and protect them. And if we're not gotten that across, we got to do a better job at that. So when we're done with this committee, I want us to work with our police department, say they're good men, they're good women, and they're committed to doing this. And then there's some accountability. So when things aren't what it should be doing, it's going straight to the COB. We're going to be transparent. They're going to see it. And then we're going to hold ourselves accountable as a city, because this is what it's about. We're here as law enforcement officers. We're for the people, by the people, to serve the people. And I want to see an agency truly committed to serve every person, whether homeless or rich, the same, and enforce the law without bias. So that's what I'd like to see come out of this committee. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. I appreciate it. I have to tell you, I knew your comments were going to be good when you started out with your babies talking in the background. And I think we should just agree as a committee that children's sounds are okay at all times, especially in the world that we're living in now. So thank you for your comments. Mr. Pulley.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I appreciate that. I've really enjoyed listening to not only the diverse backgrounds that people are sharing, but also the things that are very important to them. Yeah, I told you a little bit about my background. You understand that I spent 36 years in law enforcement, but specifically, a little more specifically, that came as I spent some time as a firefighter, a local police officer in the city of Virginia Beach, state trooper in Virginia, and I came to Nashville in the mid-1980s as an FBI agent. I had the opportunity to do a little bit of work with Tory Johnson, and I have the utmost respect for how he ran his office, and so I'm really pleased to see him on this committee. I also know a couple of the other people on the committee fairly well. I'm pleased to be serving with them. In addition to my service professionally, spent a lot of time. I also am the parent of an African-American child who also has a disability. So I appreciate Mr. Matthews bringing up what he said about disability policies with the police department, because that's very important to me as well. I also spent a lot of time in underserved communities, doing a lot of work there. So I have a little bit of empathy from that perspective. I also think that we share the perspective of our life's experience and who we are. So I think it's real important that we invest in being able to hear other perspectives, because we don't all have them ourselves. Ms. Bilal brought up a very important point. I do agree with the charges that we've been given in the document, use of force, COB relations, and de-escalation practices. She also brought up culture. Culture, to me, I think is maybe the number one issue. However, where I think the biggest impact to the police department culture is going to come is who we hire as a police chief. Whoever the leader of this department is going to set that culture. So when this decision is made, it's going to be extremely important that that is addressed with whoever our police chief is, because culture is basically everything. If you don't, and you know, we've all heard many things about the culture of the current police department. And, you know, I'm not in the police department, so I don't know. And I do know we're kind of looking into some of those things, but culture is very important. I experienced culture, and there's some good things I experienced about the cultures that I was a part of, and there were some bad things. And, you know, as policing in general involves, it's very important that we bring our communities into this discussion. When I talk to leaders of, for example, African-American communities, what I hear them say is transparency is a very, very important issue. they don't really talk. A lot of the people I talk to don't necessarily talk about defunding police as much as they do changing the culture, which includes a level of transparency. And, the new chief needs the bandwidth to be able to communicate with underserved communities. And I also heard, Mr. Delgado, he talked about hiring practices. And if you talk to the police department, they're struggling in that arena right now. And it's very important that we figure that out. And if there are any policy recommendations that we can come up with to address that, that's important. I also hear from leaders of underserved communities. The de-escalation component is very important. I've talked to people who, and having been a police officer, we ask, and this was brought up by several people in the discussion. We ask an awful lot of our police officers. We ask them to be psychologists. We ask them to be de-escalators. We ask them to be physically fit. We ask them to arrest people and handle physical confrontations. We also ask them many, many, many different things, and it's nearly impossible to do that job that they're asked to do. So I think it is important to examine, who else can we engage in some of these responses? Do we put a mental health person with a police officer on patrols from time to time? Are these things appropriate? So I think it's important. Mr. Matthews brought up a couple other things about training and policies, and I think what I found on the council is that many of our council members did not know really what changes have been made with respect to policies in the police department. They did not know what training tools were being offered as ongoing training tools to our police department and as initial training tools during their academy process. So I think it's real important that we get a representative from the police department, and there are several we've asked to come before our public safety committee to deliver this message. And I think it'd be important for us to hear from that. I also think it's important for us to hear as a policy committee, I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but have some leaders in our underserved communities, somebody like Bishop Walker, who can speak to many, many different people, come before us and tell us what he's hearing from the many people he serves and people like that. So anyway, that would be my suggestion. And again, privileged to be here. And thank you all for your service. And I'm glad to be able to contribute in what small way I can.
Thank you, Mr. Pulley. Mr. Sheriff.
Good evening. Can you hear me? All right, awesome. I'm Robert Sherrill, returning citizen, first and foremost. I got out of prison. I was just determined to change. So I've been out since 2014, and upon being released, I've built an amazing company. I do a lot in the community, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I've experienced both sides of the fence, and I was very happy to be appointed because when a lot of times when you have these sort of task force or commissions, then you get a lot of people from the same pond, right? A lot of the same. And what I like about this commission is that it's very diverse. And in order to change the narrative and put forth some fresh new ideas and perspectives, it's important that you have a lot of different people with various different backgrounds. So I'm excited to be a returning citizen, to be on this board, because now I sit before you as a successful CEO, author, speaker, and so I've experienced both sides. It's called it the best of both worlds, so to speak. And with that, I have different differences of opinion on a lot of things, not because of my experiences with law enforcement. It's just I get to talk to those everyday people that are being policed in those neighborhoods. It's not protect and serve in the 3720 area code. That's where I'm from. I've been there all my life. I'm a unicorn. That's what they call me. And I still get pulled over. I still get profiled. I still have, you know, rough interactions with law enforcement because all they do is patrol this area and they got it locked down and they're looking for something. Whenever you see a police out North Nashville, they're looking for something. It's not, hey, how you doing? Is everything okay? It's, what are you doing? Why are you over here? Why are you standing out here? Why are you parked over here? You know, and so I'm glad to be on here because I bring that perspective. But I am on this commission with an open mind. Culture is definitely something that needs to be changed because, you know, it's different. I mean, police, how we say it, they have their own culture. I mean, you know, they talk about the stuff that they do throughout the day. They have their own lingo. They have their own way of policing, so to speak. But I definitely think that it needs to be some sort of meeting or something to bridge the gap between the people in the community and the police that they're going to see police in their neighborhood all the time. And I think that would definitely smooth over some of the presuppositions that a person will have when being in the areas like that. I'm also de-escalation practices is very important. I mean, everyone see what's going on. I remember being a juvenile, being arrested, and I kind of got beat up when I got caught. And I remember screaming out, I'm a juvenile, I'm a juvenile. And they just kept punching me as I was like if I was a grown man, and I'm small. And this is some of the stuff that I remember growing up in Nashville experiencing. So I'm very interested in being a part of, you know, changing some of the culture, some of the policies and things of that nature as it pertains to MNPD. And then also the COB having the power once, like Lionel said, once we're done to be able to take the gains and be effective going forward is definitely a plus. But I commend the mayor. I commend you all for being here and doing this work because it's a work that a lot of people, you know, shy from. You know, I have friends now. We have these tough conversations, but and what I found ironic is no matter what's happening, some people still think that what's happening is not happening. Like literally, it's amazing. And these are smart people who've done amazing things, but they still look at what's going on and say, "Oh, it's just a coincidence." This is not a coincidence no more. I mean, America is definitely experiencing some problems with racial tension and policing and things of that nature, which we all know. But I am definitely happy to be here and to give my perspective and hopefully be a part of change for this community. And I look forward to working with you all. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Robinson.
Good evening. I'm Warwick Robinson. I'm an attorney here in Nashville. I've part of a small firm, 4 lawyers. Much of my practice has been criminal defense work. So I have had the opportunity to be there from the time the handcuffs were put on until the time that an individual walked handcuffed into the jail for however long. I think my background will help with this committee. I'm excited to be working with everybody, excited that the mayor had the foresight to put this committee together and let us represent collective voices from all over Nashville. I don't want to go on about my background, Ms. Davis. What I would like to, I know as part of, I guess, the process outline we were given, I would like to spend a couple of minutes with your permission to tell you what I would like to do moving into the next meeting. I would very much like to have a copy of the deadly force policy, Ms. Davis. I would like to very much have a copy of the use of force policy. I think a lot of times there's a lot of information that's put out that's not necessarily correct, but if we have an opportunity to see these policies ourselves, then I think we know the black and white of it. I would respectfully request that you invite the head of the Metro Training Academy to our meeting. I want to know what he or she is teaching these cadets as they come through on their way to being a police officer. I know that there's also in the law, we call it continuing legal education. So I feel quite certain, I believe the police have to have continuing policing education every year. So if we can find out, if we can invite the person leading the training academy, we got a lot of smart people on this panel, and I think we all have questions we would like to ask. If we could have those policies before we had a speaker, that would be nice to prep for that meeting. I know that they also teach legal classes, so I would think the head of the training academy could speak to that, but it might be somebody underneath him or her that would come and talk to us. I know at the training academy also that they have, I'm going to call it a simulator, use of force simulator. I've heard people talk about it. Can we go see that? Can we, I guess, go on a field trip? Maybe we can, maybe we can't during these COVID times, but I would very much like to do that. And I also read, Ms. Davis, where it would be possible at some point for us to do a ride along with a police officer. I know as a baby lawyer, I was taught that you will never go wrong going to the scene of the arrest or the accident, because until you see it yourself, you may or may not really understand the landscape. So I would respectfully request if we could find out how to do that, and I would certainly encourage all of us to try that. And I think that's all I have, Ms. Davis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Fantastic suggestions here. And certainly last but not least here, Mr. Woods.
Thank you. I've still got the same policy suggestions I made at the end of our last meeting, but let me preface by saying my background. I've been litigating civil rights cases here in Nashville for 50 years, primarily focused on racial discrimination, sex discrimination, sex harassment, and use of excessive force by law enforcement agents. Agencies don't use force. The individual officers do. I couldn't agree more with 99% of everything I've heard tonight. And what I want to try to emphasize and bring to this committee's work is, I don't care what policies we recommend adoption of, if we don't get really good leadership enforcing and implementing those policies, we've wasted our time. So I'd like to see, in terms of data and knowledge brought to the committee, number one, I'd like for the staff to bring us on an annual basis for the last 5 or 10 years, how many complaints have been filed against police officers in Metro and what the disposition of those complaints were. I think we'll see some very interesting data there, which will shock most of us, I suspect. Number two, I'd like for the staff to provide to us the present policies of the Nashville Police Department as to how they handle a matter involving an allegation of excessive use of force when the TBI investigation is completed. We've recently changed the policies there where the TBI investigates some of the complaints about Nashville officers' excessive use of force, What I want to know is, what's the Nashville Police Department policy when the TBI finishes their investigation and says 1, 2, 3, 4? What does the Nashville Police Department then do with that information? And what are the formal procedures and process for handling that? Because that's how we can evaluate and judge whether we're getting modern, competent leadership. Are they really implementing and enforcing their own policies? I hope they are. I don't know. I do know, and I couldn't agree more with what Warwick Robinson just said, that those of you who are interested really ought to view the simulations and training videos used. Last time I viewed them, which has been at least 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, I got a federal court order finally. I went over and sat through every video simulation they had on shoot or don't shoot. You know what jumped out at me immediately? The bad guy in every simulation where there was a bad guy, the bad guy was black or brown. There wasn't a single video with a white guy being the bad guy. Deliberate, indifference, negligence. I don't know. I think they very swiftly started changing those after we talked about it in federal court. I think we've got to change the culture. And again, that's a leadership question, at least as much as it is a policy question. Use of video cameras and the resulting video film. If we want to change the culture, we need to look at the policies that deal with who gets to see the body camera videos. I know they just went through all this, and the bottom line is the prosecutors and the defense attorneys and the judges get to see it, and maybe some juries get to see it. No, 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 wrong approach. If we want the community to trust what the police department's doing, and if we want the community to understand just how hazardous and boring and difficult a police officer's job is, let's let the community see those body cam videos. Most of them are going to be very boring, of course. Some of them are going to show just what great officers we've got sometimes. Some of them are going to show officers who don't give a damn and superiors, supervisors who are not paying attention. I think we need to look at the policies about who gets to see those dash cam and body camera videos. Finally, on the leadership question, we need to enforce appreciation. We need to recommend policies that will require the police department to follow the leadership of the Community Oversight Board. We, the citizens, by an overwhelming majority, created the Community Oversight Board. Those are going to be the only people who on a recurring basis will have the institutional knowledge, A, to carry out whatever we recommend, and B, to make sure that the leadership of the police department is enforcing their policies and following them. You know, we're not going to be able to do this. Our committee is going to last 3 months and we're going to be history. The city council can't do it. They've got, as Russ will quickly admit, 100 other things just as important, maybe more important at times, that they've got to focus on. And yes, his police committee can look more closely, but still they don't have the staff and the resources. We've got to expect and get the community to expect and get the police department to understand that's the job of the Community Oversight Board, one of the jobs of the Community Oversight Board. I think we need policies about the psychological standards that new recruits have to meet. I think we need to closely look at, we've obviously got at least one member of the committee who's going to be an expert in the area to some degree. We need to closely evaluate the minimum psychological standards they're imposing on recruits. And frankly, I think those standards need to be stricter, but I'm not necessarily the expert on that. I've got an open mind about it. I think we need to examine it and find out. We need to examine the policy about how the narcotic drug laws are enforced in this city. You know, we've been following Richard Nixon's war on drugs for 50 years, and basically the drug policy enforcement depends on who the vice captain is this year, as opposed to 5 years ago, as opposed to 10 years ago. And the use of confidential informants from the drug culture, the addicts, the junkies who make up most of the confidential informers, you know, we need to look at what the police department's internal controls policies are with respect to use of that kind of information. Because again, that gets back to what does the community think about, feel about, emote about the police department? And if we don't give the community reasons to trust the police department, we're not going to be very effective at solving crimes. We're going to continue to have the same kind of problems they've had in Kenosha, they've had in Louisville, they've had in Minnesota, they've had in Georgia. You know, I've sued the Nashville police 9 or 10 times over excessive use of force, including deadly use of force 3 different times. The story never changes. You know, Warwick's right. We need to look closely at the spectrum on the use of force policies, and just as importantly, whether those actual policies are actually the ones that are being used every day in the field. I don't think they are. Last time I was deposing officers 4 or 5 years ago, it seemed pretty obvious to me they were not. That wasn't the point of the lawsuit, so it never really got ruled on by the court, but it seemed real clear. You know, we've got a police department here in Nashville that's no better and no worse than most police departments in the nation. But unfortunately, we all see on the nightly news just how low grade the performance and integrity of so many police departments are. We've got a lot of good people in the Nashville Police Department. I don't think we're getting the leadership they need. I don't think they're getting the policies they ought to have to follow. We've got, and so does the rest of the nation, I'm not picking on the Nashville police here, we've got the worst clearance rates, worst solution rates for crime that we've had in 50 years. Think of all the improvements. CSI, I know the TV shows aren't realistic, but we've had a lot of improvements in CSI. We've got DNA, we've got tons more equipment, we've got much better training programs, and we've got the lowest solution rates we've had in 50 years. The reasons for that: lack of leadership, bad policies. We can speak to that, and I look forward to contributing to that.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Very helpful. I will I want to acknowledge the time here, and I believe we're very close to wrapping here. Just 2 things that we need to address quickly as a team here. But I'll share just briefly my background. I'm a diversity and inclusion practitioner. I've been in this role, or this type of role, for about 10 years. Also, naturally, I love history, so I'm a student of history, but focused in a lot of my professional career in the civil rights space, and primarily worked on that space in the White House at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that had me on the road quite a bit. So I traveled out to about 37 states on behalf of the government, engaging with community affairs, social services, mental health, as well as disability advocacy work as well. I'm a lawyer by training, and I would still call myself a baby lawyer, Mr. Robinson. I appreciate that phrase there. That's got a baby face, so most folks think I'm an intern when I show up in the room anyway. But I am very, very interested in the intersection of those that feel voiceless or marginalized in communities, and access, and quite frankly, opening a space where it's okay to disagree, but it is expected that we listen to one another. And that's what I've been really appreciative of tonight. There's been very interesting perspectives. I love the ideas. I've been writing like crazy, but we have some really rich opportunity here in front of us. Because we don't have on the commission as a whole right now a representative from the trans community, I would love if we could find someone who can give us a very unique perspective and voice on what use of force we need to think about as it relates to the trans community specifically. And I want to share, I think earlier this week, we got a call in a community forum that suggested the Cahoots organization out of Oregon, I believe it's Salem, as being a really good model of mental health resources and the police working together. So I'd love it if we could get some information on that. I also noticed online NACO, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, they have a symposium presentation on utility of force factors for community engagement on use of force. I'm happy to share that, Mr. Button and Ms. Crawford, and of course, Mr. Brown, with you after the call, and certainly, of course, Ms. Cirillo. But I think it would be great if we could share this out with the committee to use and to think about maybe if that could be a potential guest speaker. And then last but not least, the Policing Project has a use of force policy guidelines offering best practices on a national level. They've done quite an extensive research on this. I'm not assuming that in any way that our experts here that the mayor's office have not thought about this and engaged this, but wanted to answer the question here on some of the things that I'm hoping we can bring to the front here. I was taking a bit of notes here. I want to pause and yield here, but I've been trying to bucket here as we've been talking and putting check marks here, but it's very clear, of course, use of force is an important topic we want to talk about. But I wonder if the committee might be open to putting use of force and de-escalation side by side, perhaps not looking at them as separate topics, but perhaps we're just saying de-escalation, use of force are combined topics that we want to prioritize and talk about and commit to. I also see the engagement of citizens having sort of kind of being multi-tiered. We had great suggestions around relationships, mental health, physical disabilities, trauma-informed response. I think naturally in that space too, there was the intentional recruitment opportunities and exposure in that space. And so perhaps we can think about that cascading as well. And then third, certainly culture. And I'm saying culture and seeing in that kind of next to that is the relationship with the COB, because we want to be intentional about that language. But under that culture, there was great examples and thoughts about bias and how we can be implicit or otherwise, the relationship again with the COB, diversity and inclusion, accountability with capital letters, which I thought was an incredible suggestion as well, and much more. But I'd love to hear people's thoughts here on whether that's a comfortable approach, if we think those are the three, or if I missed anything. And then also perhaps if there's no comments on that, I'd also love to extend the floor to Mr. Brown here, who's certainly indispensable to all this work that we're doing here too. So let me yield in case anyone has any thoughts, and if not, we'll go to Mr. Brown.
I just have one thought, Ashley, that I wanted to add to your checklist. Definitely, and maybe this goes in your culture bucket, is just a little bit of a notion of the discussion that's going on nationally and locally about defunding the police. I think that we as a committee have to think about the direction that that is going to go. And I know that me being a person on this committee, I've been asked by people that have seen the list publicized, oh, are you for defunding the police? And I think my first question is, what do you mean by that? Does that mean that that's just going to be a scratch line item? Or what do you mean when you use those words, defunding the police? And I think what I've found is that what people are really saying is it needs to be a bigger tent. It needs to be more of a community response to crime that needs to occur. And so I think I'd like to just kind of add community response to crime in that bucket. There have been a lot of examples that people have talked about today. I know in San Antonio, we had a mental health team that rode along with the police for all domestic violence calls, suicide calls, sexual assault calls. We also had a police ride-along program. Like I think it was Warwick that mentioned he would love to do that. We had a separate program that anybody in the community could volunteer, do a weekend training, because they had to understand and know the risks that were involved and what they needed to do to be part of that. That was also an example of something that aided the community in being involved in the process. And many, many other things. And I don't want to go into them. I'm happy to share them at a later date. But I do think that we need to think about bringing the community into our responses, our law enforcement responses. I think that will kind of move that defunding the police argument down the road a little bit when people really start thinking about what they really want.
Thank you, Ms. Pelosi. Very good point. Thank you. Anyone else here, members of the committee? Not Mr. Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair. Also, Vice Chair, and to the rest of the participants, thank you all today. My name is Eric Brown. I'm a Nashville native. My background, I'm a graduate from American Baptist College, where John Lewis was a student as well. Also a graduate of Vanderbilt University, and a graduate of Vanderbilt Divinity School. My background is mostly in community organizing, where a lot of my work was also, just like Mir, with Children's Defense Fund. We had a Nashville team where we worked on the Cradle to Prison pipeline. Also went within the school system to discuss and talk about that with children, as well as going to Riverbend Maximum Security, where we was on death row, as well as Unit 6, just to talk about some of the things that happened with a lot of those that were on the inside. And they talked about their experiences and how they were connected to the school system, to where they had presently either ended up there or just some of their experiences and what they felt as far as support that they needed once they got out. And that really guided a lot of our work that we did as far as talking about children's organizing. I'm glad to see Mayor Dean, because one of the things that Children's Defense Fund national team also did was create Nashville Freedom Schools, which Mayor Dean was also a part of making sure happened here in Nashville, and how much that really helped to the success of a lot of kids here. I also live in North Nashville, the 37208 area. As far as police, I've always had very mixed views. One, because I've always had family members that were police, my wife as well. Many of her family members are police, but I've also been beat up by police. De-escalation is very important to me, but also just thinking about being a student at Vanderbilt University, to where I got put over on numerous occasions all the time, was asked very different things. So of course I want to always make sure that the relationship between policemen and also other citizens is very open and also very safe. I think that is the biggest thing for me, is also about safety within this process. What does that look like, and how does that help us all to be creative beings and be who we need to be as people within that work? Beyond that, I also did faith organizing as well as environmental organizing as well, which was my job in Memphis a year ago before I came back here to work with the mayor in November. So with that being said, one of the things, and I think Mr. Robinson has already went into this, is that we'd also like to know who are some of the people that you would like for us to have here, just to talk about, be subject matter experts. Who are those people that we need to bring here, and so that they can present also with the information. Of course, we know that the community oversight will be a part of this. Dr. Valier will give a lot of findings as far as use of force policies. I think we heard the policing project, so I know that that will be brought up. But beyond that, who are other things? I think we also heard the chair talk about a member from the trans community that might also want to talk about their experiences. We definitely have examples of those that might be from the Muslim communities or the immigrant communities that might want to talk about their expertise or some of their knowledge of what they feel. But are there other people that we would love to hear, that you would love to hear from, that we want to bring there? And so I'll take that back to the chair, and she can open up the floor for conversation around that.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I do want to just add to that list. I believe it was shared by Mr. Robinson here. We'd like to hear from the director or the lead of the Metro Training Academy. Also believe, and I will yield to others going through the list. There was a lot of talk about those that offer mental health professionals. I believe Ms. Freeman, you gave a few examples in that space. So if you'd like to share exact details there. But if anyone else has specific people they would like to highlight, please feel free. Yeah, Vice Chair Lucas, feel free.
Yeah, Amanda Bracht, B-R-A-C-H-T. She's a vice president at Mental Health Co-op, and she has been really involved with and I'm so sorry it's late and it's been a long day. I can't remember the name of the center, but it's the center where the police can bring people who are having mental health episodes. They've partnered with MNPD on that. And she has a wealth of information, I believe, about ways in which, working with the police in order to sort of divert mental health. She had a lot to do with the development of the mental health court when Judge Eisenstein started that. So I think she would be an excellent person to come and talk about the possibilities of partnering with an agency like the co-op to see about getting them involved. So she's just somebody I've thought about involving in this process.
Might she not be better talking to the workforce committee with that background and experience?
So one of the things that we'll do is there will be areas of overlap. I know that workforce will be very focused on culture, and we'll just have to work with the committee chairs, and some overlap is fine, maybe even good. That'll be one of the things that we'll have to adjudicate. And then obviously, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Lucas, we will reach out to you tomorrow as part of sort of providing follow-up on this, and we'll work with you to identify subject matter experts. Not to cut this short, but that'll be part of our workflow. And so, of course, everyone else is also invited to reach out to Brianna with suggestions, to reach out to Ms. Davis, Ms. Lucas directly. We'll be sharing a directory of everyone on the committee along with contact information in the next day or two so that you can all easily be in touch with each other as well. We've already started working on pulling together information of the sort that you've requested, and we will coordinate with chairs and vice chairs and make sure that your requests are reflected in the information package, which you'll receive next week before the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Button. And I just want to highlight, so we can add to this list here, I believe Ms. Bilal mentioned the San Antonio resources there. So we can reach out to you to figure out if there's a specific contact there, Ms. Bilal, but that would be helpful too.
Yes, well, that was one thing I was going to ask. Are we looking for people to contribute to this from a national perspective? Are we looking more local, Southeast, communities that are the same size as our communities? Because we want to make sure, you know, we can compare apples to apples to some extent.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think that's a fair question. For now, I would say, especially since we're at the beginning stages of this, let's share all the best practices we have, even if it's not apple to apples right now. And then we can certainly bring that back to the group to ensure we're taking the best approach. But I appreciate Mr. Button also connecting us so that we can continue to keep this conversation going. Mr. Brown, if you need any additional information from the group on this, please let me know. But it sounds like we'll have an opportunity to share after the meeting here in future time here. Be great. I believe we've touched everything on our agenda item here, except for I'd love to just ask a quick question of Ms. Cirillo. I understand you've been preparing information for the group. Is there any update you want to share with us on that particular point there before we wrap up?
Certainly. First of all, I've taken notes, so I have identified the areas in which committee members are very interested in receiving information. I think the level set packet has to include an overview of who is in the force today and what that has looked like on a trend line. I think that overview also has to include use of force, what that looks like. There's some very good data on use of force as it reflects on the population. So there is a cut that looks at Black men especially. I think that's going to be important data to take a look at. Certainly the full use of force policy we can get out to the committee so you can see that. We can also get out the history, the timeline of what policies have been updated and what that looks like. So that's some of what I've heard. I'd also like to briefly speak to Vice Chair Lucas's comments about the mental health co-op. The mental health co-op hosts what is called the Crisis Treatment Center. It's been up and running and funded by the City Council for the last year and a half. And they also partner with MNPD on some calls, on some mental health calls. And I think that there's some good work that's being done through my department at the MPHD that will be important for everybody to know about so that you understand the kind of legwork that has been done around the relationship around decriminalizing mental illness so that we can ensure that we can build on that. And don't have you repeating work that has been done. So those are the updates that I have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Button or Mr. Brown here, could you just confirm for me, I'm going through my list here, but it feels that we've satisfied the agenda items for today. Is there anything else that's outstanding I might not be aware of?
I believe that is correct, Ms. Davis, and we will reach out to you tomorrow to schedule a follow-up call and prepare for our next meeting, finalize these requests.
Great, fantastic. Well, is there, I don't believe we called the meeting. I would feel it's most appropriate. Do we need to have a motion to adjourn here? I believe we're utilizing Robert's rules here, right?
We're being more casual. It's up to you to set the rules, but I think that no formal motion to adjourn, I don't think is necessary.
Okay, then we'll have a lax Thursday. There we go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. This is a great first meeting. Thank you all for your time.
See you next week. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.